Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. On behalf of the National Student Attendance Engagement and Success Center, I welcome you here in Baltimore and also to our audience across the nation. We're so excited to be here. Today, we are going to be starting with our first plenary where we're focusing on building level tools that you can use in your Success Mentor initiatives. My name is Cecilia Leong. I'm the Associate Director for Programs at Attendance Works. We are a partner with Jobs for the Future, Johns Hopkins, and Mentor in working with NSAESC. That's going to roll off my tongue by the end of the day. But it is a pleasure to be here, and I am pleased to be joined with my colleagues from Oakland Unified, LA Unified, and Aurora Public Schools in Colorado. And we'll go in greater depth in just a moment. What I really want to say is that our focus today really is to offer tools that are helpful to folks at a school building level. In some ways, it's very technical sounding. We'll be talking a lot about data and data reports. And why are we doing this? Why this sexy topic of data today? It's because we need to have the data to know which students are chronically absent, who are missing so much school that their futures are being affected. We also need to know, as people who have scarce time, scarce resources, and value the people that we have, that our interventions are actually making a difference. And data is what is going to help us understand whether we've applied the right solutions or whether we need to think about what more we need to do to make a difference. So when we're going through this hour together and we're talking about data and numbers and percentages, what I want you to remember is that behind every number is a student. It's a student we all care about very deeply, and behind that student is a family and a community that loves this young person and wants him or her to succeed. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce my fellow presenters. To my left is Teresa Clincy. Teresa is an amazing colleague from Oakland Unified School District in California. And I've just had such a privilege of working with her over the years.
Thank you.
So welcome, Teresa. Next, we have Dr. Brenda Manuel, who's been with Los Angeles Unified School District for over 40 years. And that wealth of experience that she's bringing is so invaluable. And her colleague, Wes Hall, who's been working with Dr. Manuel in LA Unified to really put the focus on our young men and women of color, to really create that village approach that makes a difference, has also joined us. And Wes, I heard you have a radio show, which is super exciting. We'll hear more about that too, I'm sure. And finally, Christina Ethier is an analyst with Aurora Public Schools in Colorado. And we discovered Christina, who's just a gem in terms of not just her technical skills in representing data, but in how she and her department are so responsive to what principals at the building level are asking for. So that is today's agenda. And the way we're going to structure this is that we're going to start with the simplest tools and the ones that I think may be of most interest if you're just starting out. So I'll do a little talking about Attendance Works and the tools that we offer. Then we'll get into the more complex tools with the districts, and we'll end with the custom build tools that Aurora Public Schools uses. So those are our presenters. Sorry, I have to actually remember to advance the slides. Thought control is not working today. All right, so let me start out first. So at Attendance Works, we really try as a nonprofit to give you tools that you can take and use relatively easily. These are tracking tools that we have for chronic absence data that are free of charge. And some of you, and this is in direct response to questions, have said, well, where are these free tools? Where do we get these? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the tools are and how you can obtain them. And most importantly, what questions you can answer. Now, I know for those of you in this room here, this is probably pretty elementary because you've been working hard at it. But there may be folks in our Facebook audience who actually don't know and would want to go on. I can't read that. Oh, and the slides are in the packet. Okay, thank you for reading for me. I'm also nearsighted, so this is really quite challenging. So, all right. So back to the tracking tools. So these are free tracking tools, the district attendance tracking tool and the school attendance tracking tool. It comes in 3 different modules, elementary, middle, and high school, and a combination tool. It's like a stapler, but not. Okay, so here's the steps you take to get these tools. It's a 4-step process. It's pretty easy. First, you need to register, get your ducks in a row, run your data, and then put your data into action. So the registration is pretty straightforward. You go to attendanceworks.org. Under our Tools and TA tab, you would pick the Calculating Chronic Absence slide, fill in the blanks, and that completes your registration. Now, after you register, do not call me and say, it's been 30 seconds, I do not have the tool, where is it? It actually takes us a little bit to send you an invitation to our secure website, Basecamp, where we actually keep the tools. Once you get that, then you are able to download the tools, okay? So, like I said, be patient, more than 30 seconds. All right, what do we mean by get your ducks in a row? Well, first, we really want you to have the people who know what they're doing with the data help you out. So contact your district information technology department. You want someone like a Christina who's actually going to do this and make your life easier. You do not want to do this by yourself. It's like those action car shows. Don't try this at home alone, kids. This is, you want the professional. Okay, so when you talk to your database administrator, ask them to download the tools and read the handbook that we offer. And then run the data. This is hopefully what they will help you do. So these tools are basically pre-calculated spreadsheets where once you import the data into it, it auto-calculates the chronic absence reports that you're going to want. So once you get the data pulled, format it, and put it in the tools, the reports auto-populate, and they spit out. All right, this is kind of like that seeing eye thing, but these are the different elements that your data person will pull out. The student's name, different characteristics about them, whether they're an English learner, their ethnicity, gender, grade, school, which is really important, and then days present and absent. Those are the pieces that we need to calculate the reports. So what do you get? You get some pretty cool reports, and the pieces that are really important, this is a sample report from a not very anonymous district to my left, from several years ago. And it tells you this is the report that tells you the chronic absence levels by grade. So for those of you with good eyesight, which grades stick out? Can you see? 10th grade? Kindergarten. Okay. So this is just an example of the type of report that shows the patterns that will help you figure out how many kids you have absent, which ones, and where they're concentrated. So you may indeed want to really focus on one of the highest grade levels. Okay. We also have a school report that summarizes which schools. So if you're trying to figure out, well, where do I go next with my Success Mentor strategy? Which school do I want to expand to? You may want to take a look at the schools that are having the higher levels of chronic absenteeism. So the DAT and SAT offer you that kind of piece. And then finally, we have a student list, who's chronically absent. And if you run this at the end of a school year, at the beginning of the year, you are poised and ready, knowing which students were chronically absent last year. So you don't have to wait till January, February, March to know who's in trouble. You know from day one who you really want to target and provide support to. Okay, so these are just some of the requirements that you need technically to run the DAT and SAT, but I leave you with the registration piece so that you can register and wait patiently for your tools. So these are free of charge from AttendanceWorks. Okay. So that's like the easy version, and that's just the snapshot. I'd like to show you some way better whiz-bang tools, and for that, I'm going to turn to my friend Teresa Clincy.
Thank you, Cecilia. So as stated earlier, I'm Teresa Clincy from Oakland Unified School District, and I coordinate attendance and discipline support services. And we're a district of 87 schools. We have 37,000 students, 25% African American, 13% Asian, 45% Latino, about 73% free and reduced lunch. And we started looking at our chronic absence data in around 2010, and at that time, our chronic absence rate was at 16%. Our schools were not really prepared at that time to look at chronic absenteeism because our focus had been pretty much on truancy. I was a principal at the time, and I remember getting a report one week with ADA, average daily attendance, saying it was 96%. Then the next week I'd get another report that said, oh, your truancy rate is at 87%. And I'm looking at two reports thinking, well, I know that I have 800 plus kids in this building every day. They're in class, so I don't understand how 87% can be truant. So that really highlighted the problem that we had as a district, and that our efforts and our reports didn't provide the information nor training needed to really address chronic absenteeism. So our research and assessment department began producing reports that actually provided chronic absence information, but little training accompanied that. So site administrators still didn't really understand chronic absenteeism. So we knew what we needed to do, and we had some goals that we developed goals that we wanted to accomplish. One goal was we needed to really figure out were we taking accurate attendance, and that was questionable as to how we were taking attendance. We also wanted to reduce chronic absenteeism, and our overarching goal is for every school to reduce chronic absenteeism to 5% or below. We wanted to increase student engagement, and we were looking at two measures. One is suspension rates, and the other was chronic absence rates. We wanted to improve school culture attitudes about attendance, and we wanted to provide targeted support to students who were chronically absent, and really grades K through 8, but also in the high school. So we started to address the problem by really looking at what did we have to do to set up our schools to be successful. One was that every school needed to have an attendance team, because without a team leading the effort, things fall by the wayside. The team had to have a plan, and a plan had to include data. It had to include early outreach, recognition for good and improved attendance. We needed to take a look at barriers, what was causing and preventing children and parents from coming to school. We wanted to have structures in place for identifying and monitoring chronic absence or students at risk for chronic absence. And we wanted that plan to be put in place and be a living, evolving document. We needed, obviously, an attendance lead, and we wanted that to be someone other than the principal, because the principal definitely needs to be involved. They need to know what's going on, but the lead needs to really make this almost a full-time job. And so the lead needed to be someone other than the principal, if at all possible. We needed to provide training and support. We needed to have meeting structures, i.e. agendas, a regular time to meet. We needed to have data. And then there had to be roles and responsibilities for the team members. Who was the lead? Who was generating the data reports? Who was monitoring the tracker? Who was doing the follow-up? So each school was actually being asked to do their own cycle of inquiry, looking at their data, identifying gaps, putting in place an action plan. From that action plan, implementing it, looking at data, making modifications, and then beginning the cycle over again. We began to embark on this journey, and then we had to do our own cycle inquiry at the district level and take a look at, well, what data were we actually providing to the schools? 3 years ago, our attendance reports were in a PDF format produced by our data department. Only the principal had access. And although the reports contained some great information, by the time the principal had time to print it, get it to the next person who was going to take a look at it, the data's 3 weeks old. And so we realized that in order to target students in need and really get interventions to children who needed it, we needed to make the data accessible to more than just the principal. It needed to be disaggregated, it had to be timely, it had to be relevant, and it had to provide both district, school, and student level data to more than just one person at the site. So without this type of data, it was very difficult to identify and target students who needed our attendance interventions. So currently, we have several data sources that our attendance teams use to provide targeted student data that we use to identify students for intervention, including the mentoring program. The first set of data is from our student information system. We have data, of course, that tells you when students are absent by period or day. And then we also have an intervention system within that student information system that identifies what interventions have already been implemented with students. And these reports will tell students whether they have had, or will tell the team whether they've had a coordination of services referral, been referred to a student study team, but it just gives the team a sense of what's already been implemented with the student and whether or not those interventions make them a good candidate for mentoring. We also began then producing a weekly engagement report. And the weekly engagement report is produced obviously every week.
Do you want to refer them to the handout?
You can take a look at the handout if you can't read it, because I know it's a little small.
This is in your packet inside on the left-hand side, so that you can follow along. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's just that the nearsighted people of the world can't help.
I understand. Thank you. So I'm on, I think the fourth or fifth slide, the fifth slide. The weekly engagement report captures a particular week. So in this example, it's week 36. And so it tells the school what their chronic absence rate is in week 36. It gives them the prior 6 weeks, and it gives them week 36 in the prior school year and the year before. So there are 2 prior years plus the current year's data for week 36, plus week 36 and then the preceding 6 weeks. So schools can take a look at trend data. Then on the next slide, there is a chronic absence dashboard. And these dashboards give multi-year data, but these dashboards allow principals and attendance team leads and other school site staff to actually filter what data they want to see in a given time. So they are updated every night, so it's real-time relevant data. So you can filter this by grade, by gender. You can take a look at foster youth, special education, home language, ethnicity. You can take a look at your grade level by teacher. It will tell you which classrooms have higher chronic absence rates than others. And you can also drill down and look at individual student data. We also have an absence analysis dashboard that tells you why kids are absent. It gives you, again, by school, district, and student level, why are students absent. Because we know that the conversations about unexcused absences are different than children who are absent for excused reasons. Although all miss instructional time, the conversations with families differ if they're unexcused versus excused. The last slide is a site-generated student tracker, and this allows teams to take a look and monitor progress of individual students on a weekly basis. And they color code it to match our dashboard so that green means satisfactory, yellow means they're at risk, Orange is they've fallen below 90%, but they're above 80%. And then red means they are below 80%. And it allows you to track in real time what progress children are making through the course of a year. So these are reports that help principals look at trends, highlight students at risk or chronically absent, and also alert and help us identify which children need what interventions, and as I said, including the mentoring program. What we're doing now is trying to reconfigure our dashboard so that schools don't have to create this individually, but that we can look at data systemically week by week instead of schools having to, oh, I've got to look at the dashboard this week to get the information because it'll be gone next week, will reflect a different week. So where we are now, we have 7 schools that have met our target of 5% or less. We have 17 of our schools that have chronic absence rates below 10%, and 21 schools that are approaching that 10% mark. We are currently, as a district, now at 13%, which is a 3% drop when we started, and actually this year to date, we're at 11%. So we're continuing to work and move forward, but we're seeing progress. The other piece I want to share before I pass it over to Dr. Manuel is that schools that really meet weekly, they use the student trackers, they follow up, they ensure kids are being touched, are really seeing the biggest gains. And so not only the data, but the frequency, regularity, and effectiveness of the attendance team is making the difference. And the children who are being mentored are also showing serious gains. We had 75 kids mentored last year. 51 of them showed increased attendance. So it is working across the board. Thank you.
So before we go to Dr. Manuel, thank you so much, Teresa.
Thank you.
That was marvelous. What I want you all to know, I saw a lot of furious note-taking, and we will be having a time for questions at the end of the presentations. And so do make your notes, so we'll give you that opportunity to ask questions. Okay, Dr. Manuel.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Brenda Manuel, and I am the administrator over the student unit in the Los Angeles Unified School District. The student unit is a new unit about 4 years old in LAUSD. And what we do is it's called the SIDE unit, Student Involvement, Development, and Empowerment. And it's all about involving the students in the governance of the district and in the work that we do, developing them as leaders, and then empowering them to take action on their own behalf. So just like Oakland and the other school district, LAUSD has all of the data acquisition systems, the monitoring system, the warning system, the dashboard, the interventions systems. But what we started looking at is what Cecilia talked about, that behind the data is a child. So how do we get them to be involved in their own attendance? How do we get them to say, I am going to do something to help myself? So we created a program, and Wes is going to talk to you about the program that we created, and then I'm going to come back and connect the attendance monitoring and the mentoring. It's called the Village Movement Mentoring Program. He's going to describe it, and then I'll come back and kind of follow it up.
Good afternoon. We're kind of preaching to the choir today, but, when you start talking about mentoring and student engagement, one of the things we found is an engaged student is a student that wants to come to school, wants to be in the classroom, wants to participate. So we wanted to create some vehicles that we would actually be able to engage students in a way to where they took over in terms of their voice being heard. So one of the things the department does is really heavily emphasize student voice. When you start talking about engaging stakeholders, oftentimes we're talking about administrators, we're talking about every other stakeholder except for the student. And what's interesting is when you really take a look at students, they're not as complex as you would think. Sometimes we're so old we forgot when we were young, and I'll let that one get to you in a minute. And so what we found is we have to engage the students. So we created a conference series. And what was so interesting about the conference series is who gave us the ties last year? Was it Bloomingdale's?
Yes.
In Los Angeles. Bloomingdale's gave us ties for our boys. And something we overlook as simple as we had the men from the community come and teach our boys how to tie a tie. And many of you are doing this in your districts. But the boys walked away so empowered. They felt so empowered to have men there. And let me say this to you, too, in terms of mentoring. What we have found is, especially young men of color, I want you to imagine a young boy 5, 6, or 7 years old, and he's waiting for dad. Dad doesn't live with him. He's waiting for dad to come pick him up. Dad doesn't show. This happens all through his life. He develops a defense mechanism that says, what? I don't want dad to show up anymore. It's not that he really feels this way, it's just that that's his best way to defend himself from his pain. So what we have found in mentoring is our young men are actually wanting mentors, but they don't know how to ask for it. So the district really adopted this mentoring program to the extent to where, as Dr. Manuel was sharing, there's a resolution that our student board member is now presented to the board, where actually the employees from LAUSD will be able to work 2 hours in what we call our villages throughout the district on their time. It's an amazing development, especially for a district as large as LAUSD. So the one factor we found was engagement is critical. Another thing, we developed a curriculum for our young men. And we found that there are 2 things, and it wasn't a big discovery, but there are 2 things always on the mind of a child who grows up in poverty. Anybody want to think about those 2 things? Money and food. Money and food. And we also found that if you can't find a way to connect money and food to education, especially for our young men, they may disengage. We can't expect for them to vigorously participate in the educational process if, in fact, they don't have a buy-in. And so the curriculum that we developed helped them to connect actually education to money. In other words, education can be quantified. An A on your report card can be quantified, and information can be monetized. In other words, information equals money. We grew up in the information era. So on the slides, a couple things: engaging students and parents, and providing personalized outreach, which is our mentoring program. And we found that if we provide those things, especially on the levels of engagement, our children are more apt to attend school. And we all know this. You're more apt to attend something to where you have some buy-in. When you take a look at the screen, group mentoring at the school site. So we have a village program. And it was good to hear that other districts in the room actually have mentoring programs, especially where employees can attend. We have village leads that are actually on site. We have villagers that go out to the sites, and then we have a 2 hours a month. So the time commitment is very minimal for a villager in terms of once or twice a month in terms of villagers. So I just wanted to share that. And the most important piece that I have found in terms of working, especially with our young men of color, is across your districts, if you can find some relationship building pieces, especially for your professional development with your teachers. We can't expect for teachers to all of a sudden know how to naturally build effective relationships with students that come from areas that they're not familiar with. Oftentimes in a pedagogical driven society, it's all instruction. It's instruction heavy. We all know that. We have to find some times for our teachers to help them create positive learning environments where they really understand what is punishment really used for. Punishment is not used for the individual as much as punishment is used to send a language to the culture that there isn't out of bounds. And so we have to really, and that's big. You might not have heard what I said. Punishment is never for the individual. It's only to send a message to the culture that there isn't out of bounds in terms of creating a positive learning environment within the classroom. So we do some professional development, we do parent empowerment. It's a holistic approach to creating engagement. And so I want to turn it over to Dr. Manuel. Thank you very much.
So what we do is as part of our village program, we have a mentoring program, a curriculum that we give out to all of our schools. We started with 8 schools. Now we're moving into 28 schools. And we have elementary, middle, and high school. The good thing about the village, it can be tailored to different populations. Foster youth, we have a newcomers village, we have young men of color villages. So what we do is we have a person who's in charge of it, the lead. We have villagers and we have students called scholars. Now, how does this all connect to attendance? Well, we have our students monitoring their own attendance. It's like your checkbook. The bank can send you all the statements, and you can let them monitor your checkbook. Every once in a while, you might find that, ooh, something is wrong. The bank may have made a mistake. You haven't been monitoring, and many times when you don't have that personal monitoring, you just start spending because you think, oh, I have money. Oh, look, I have money, because you haven't taken the time to subtract those checks that you have been writing. So what we want our kids to do is to monitor their own attendance by putting a little X in the days that you have been absent. So when you come and you meet with your mentor, you have checked the day, and we can sit down and talk to you about you were absent that day. How many days have you been absent since we've talked? What are the patterns? And we do a lot of questioning because we want them to have a lot of those what kind of moment, aha moment. It's not about me telling you what you need to do. It's what you need to do. Because each of our mentors, they have to do an end game. And then that end game, they have to do a roadmap. And in that roadmap, you have to look at the things that are going to keep you from getting to that end game and the things that are going to help you. So if I'm looking at your attendance and I see that you have been out, then I'm going to ask you, is that going to help you or is that going to hinder you from getting to your end game? And that's for you to make that decision. And then you will let me know. And then my job then is to help you to do better and provide you with those interventions. So we do this every time we meet. We look at we look and we just ask those questions, and then I also talk about how many days I'm absent, and how that affects me and how being absent, what does that do to me? And then we have those kinds of conversations. So it is about us giving them the power so that, because I already know how many days they've been out. I mean, they can mark 0 down there, but I already know because I have all of the dashboards. I have all of the reports. So I already know. But it really is about them knowing, because many times we don't know how much money we might have in the bank, exactly, because we've forgotten about some of the checks we've written. Sometimes you forget about how many days you've been out until you see it on a piece of paper right there in front of you. So why are we doing this? Is because we know that mentoring has a significant impact on students. And we know that if you have somebody sitting in front of you that you have a relationship with, and who looks like you, and who is your role model, and who has been there with you, you will do better. You will do better because you want to do better for yourself and for them. What we do in our program, it really is about empowering our students to get them to take charge of their own education and their own life, and to get them to understand why they need this thing called education and why that's important. So that's part of what we do. And as a result, well, we've increased our number of mentoring programs. When the schools hear about it, they're calling on a regular basis. We need to start. So we've been doing that. We also did a survey last year with our mentees, our students that we call scholars, and with our mentors who we call villagers, and we had such positive results. All of our mentors wanted to come back. All of our students want to stay in the program, and those that graduate from the program want to come back and be involved. So we know that we are on the right track, and we found that the students who are in our program, they don't miss that much school because they really want to be with us. They want to be there when we are mentoring. And we do 2 conferences a year for our young men and young women, leadership conferences where we bring all of our mentors together, and we provide them with workshops and tie-tying and handshaking and all of those things to teach them and help and and they learn from their mentors and people who look like them. So that's our program.
Thank you so much. So Dr. Manuel is absolutely right. LA Unified does have amazing dashboards, but I think what you have shared about helping young people self-monitor is so profound and so important. So our final presentation is from Christina Ethier from Aurora Public Schools in Colorado. And Christina, please share with us your, okay, so this is just the wonk update. I really like her reports. Just thought I'd share that. Okay, ready?
Sure.
Okay, here we go.
So I'm Christina Ethier. I'm a data analyst in Aurora Public Schools. Aurora Public Schools is in Colorado, and it sits just to the east of Denver Public Schools, just north of Cherry Creek Public Schools, which is a more affluent, typically thought of as a higher performing school district. And I work with, before I dive into the reports that you guys have, I just really want to acknowledge my department and my team that I work with. So I'm going to sit here and show you guys some pretty fantastic tools that are available, but there's no way I could be showing this to you without my department. So I want to acknowledge DJ, Lori, Debbie, Chris, Jennifer, and then our admin, Donna. So they're the folks that are not here with me.
But if they're on Facebook, you should
I
thumbs
know.
up right now.
So yes. So when Cecilia asked me to participate, I said, well, what do you want me to show them? We have Tableau in our district. We have, within Tableau, we have over 170 dashboards. So it runs the gamut of, surveys all the way to state reporting information, attendance information, behavior information, grades, and other academic indicators. And she said, well, let me send you a set of questions. So she sent me a set of questions. And I'm going to kind of follow the 4 questions that she sent to me. So the first question she sent is, what types of reports help principals to understand the attendance patterns in their schools? And you guys all have this packet in your folder, and you can follow along. I know there's a lot of detail and there's a lot of small pieces that might be hard to see on the screen. So the first thing I sent her back then, or when I started thinking about this question, the first thing that came to mind was, well, shoot, she sent me the DAT and the SAT when we first started working with them. And I took that and I incorporated it into Tableau. So I created a workbook that houses all of these dashboards that's called Attendance Works, appropriately enough. And it provides all kinds of information about attendance and attendance patterns. So this guy here, or this slide here, is actually, it looks pretty similar to something Cecilia showed you earlier, right? And it comes pretty much directly from the DAT or the SAT. And what it's showing you is the longitudinal patterns, so across grades, of chronic absence. So just out of curiosity, how many of you have a job where you cannot show up half a day a week? How about 1 day a week? Nope, nobody, right? So if you look at the bottom, or excuse me, if you look at the middle graph, this is severe chronic absence. And when I work with our school staff, I often talk about if a kid has severe chronic absence, they're not coming to school 20% of the time, which is equivalent to 1 day a week. So you can really see kind of the pattern that we have in our district for severe chronic absence for those kids that aren't coming 1 day a week. And you can see that it's spiked in our high schools. And then again, it's one of the neat things that we did in the last year or so was add in preschool data. So you see that our preschool kids, yep, they're struggling a little bit. About 1 in 10 of our preschool students doesn't come 1 day a week. Okay. So this is a nice tool that shows you patterns by grade level over time. The other thing I should add that I haven't said is our data system Tableau and all of these reports, they sit on a data warehouse that is effectively real time. It's 24 hours old, and it's set up that way intentionally because you can't sit something on top of a live student information system without completely pulling down the performance of the student information system. So all of this data is available to all of our principals, all of our assistant principals, lots of different school level staff, and it's 24 hours old, so it's effectively real time. And the previous slide, in this slide, we actually didn't have, I pulled these right at the beginning of the school year, so I didn't have 17-18 data to go in here. It's typically 3 years. But at that point in time, we only had 2 years. Okay, so continuing on, some of the other ways that you can look using the attendance workbook, you can look at the data and look at the trends, is by different disaggregations. So the one that I picked here is looking at attendance by race and ethnicity. And you can see kind of the percents and the counts of students that are chronically absent or have satisfactory absence or at risk absence by the different race or ethnicity groups. Okay, and then what you have are what percentage of students are chronically absent, what percentage have satisfactory attendance down below in those charts. So it really allows you to dive into different patterns that might be emerging for different student groups. The next slide then dives even further into chronic absence, and it's looking at overrepresentation or underrepresentation by group. So the first pie charts there in the first row is the disaggregation of race or ethnicity by grade level. And so you can see in our district, about half of our students typically are Hispanic or Latino. Then the bottom pie chart, what this is it's telling you what the distribution of different race or ethnicity groups is among students that are chronically absent. So you can see different patterns emerge. But one of the patterns that typically emerges is that our Hispanic and our African American students typically are overrepresented in the group of chronically absent students. Okay, whoops. I'm sorry. Okay, so this guy. Are you guys overwhelmed? Yeah. So this is our school level summary, and this is a lot to take in initially when you look at it. But what this allows us to do is it allows us to take a look, or it allows staff to look at attendance patterns over time. So really what I want to direct you guys to, and let's see if this works now. No, it's not going to work. Whoops. I'm sorry, guys. What this allows you guys then, or what it allows principals to look at then, are monthly patterns for attendance and then chronic absence. So in the bottom right of this corner is the attendance piece. But what it is also doing, what other message it's also conveying for a principal or for somebody who's supporting a building, is it gives you discipline data next to it, and then it gives you academic achievement data next to it. So you're kind of getting a whole picture of a building in one place. And here you can see this is one of our high schools that had really good success around implementing an advisory period and working with students around attendance. So you can see the orange line in the attendance graph is last year's data, 16-17, and then the little, like I said, I pulled these literally, I think maybe the first or second day of school, so the green dot is the first day of school for this year. Okay,
So this is really cool that you have attendance, behavior, and courses all in one dashboard.
Yeah.
So I hate to do this, but we have to speed up just a little. Because I
Absolutely.
want to give people a chance to ask questions.
Absolutely. Okay.
Thanks, Christina.
So I'm going to go quickly now. Per Cecilia, I am happy to answer questions offline afterwards if anybody has any. So this is period attendance. It's a period attendance heat map for our high school, and it's showing, or one of our high schools, and it's showing kind of the darker colors are where you have more absences. You can also control this so that you look at tardies or specifically at unexcused absences. Okay, so then the second question that Cecilia sent was, what type of reports help principals to understand which students would benefit from the Success Mentor strategy? So I said, well, okay, our combination report could absolutely help with this. And what this combination report does, is that it combines attendance, behavior, grades, standardized achievement, whether or not a student has an IEP, or in our state we have the Colorado READ Act, which is an early literacy act. So kids who are not on grade level for reading have to have a read plan. That's included in here as well. And then because we have a pretty high population of English language learners, particularly in the earlier grades, we have access data, WIDA access data, which is English language proficiency or obtainment of English language proficiency in there. And all of those charts then work as filters. So you can click on any pieces of those charts and filter down the student list. And we actually have two student lists in here. One is an elementary student list, which has more variables relevant to elementary schools like literacy, and whatnot. And then you have a secondary list that has more variables that are relevant to secondary. So it'll have GPA, count of Fs, cumulative credits accumulated to check and see whether or not kids are on track for graduation. So you can use all of these different charts and filter down to groups of students that might benefit or might really truly benefit from the Success Mentor strategy. And it's using more than one facet to look at a student. So it's really kind of comprehensively looking at a kiddo. This is what I was talking about. So if you click on any part of the chart, you can filter. So I clicked on the moderate absence, and you can use that to get to a list of students who you might want to implement the strategy with. Then this guy, this is looking more deeply at attendance, or specifically at attendance. And what this is a student list with, we have calendared out attendance. And then you can use, like the previous dashboard, you can use the charts, the chart, the map, and the calendar to filter the student list. And the thing in the map, do I do it? So here we go. I filtered the dashboard for kiddos with moderate chronic absence. And now the calendar is displaying attendance patterns for just those students who have moderate chronic absence.
I didn't realize it affected all of the pieces.
It affects all of the, yeah. So it's all kind of tied together and controlled by each other. Then what I can do is, if I'm interested in a particular student, I can find that student in the map. I can click on that student, and it will tell me, the pie chart will change and tell me what their attendance pattern is. So we have a student here with moderate chronic absence, and the calendar has changed to be their attendance history. So you can see, they had 2 good weeks of attendance, but then they had 2 weeks where they, didn't come 2-3 days a week. So, okay, and then what types of reports help principals monitor weekly and monthly attendance? So again, this is the student list in the Attendance Works workbook, and this can absolutely help principals monitor weekly and monthly attendance, because you have the calendar and you can see kind of different patterns that might emerge for the last 4 weeks. The other thing that we try to do in Tableau is have consistency across dashboards, or have dashboards that, so this is the school level summary that I showed you guys earlier. That was a bit overwhelming. It also has a calendar component to it when you switch the view. And then when you click on this calendar here, it'll lead you into the Attendance Works workbook that provides more detail. So again, this is another good way to monitor daily, weekly, monthly attendance. And again, back here, this is the school level summary. It gives you the monthly attendance as well as the past 2 years and then the year to date. And then Cecilia asked me to talk about the importance of schools having regular weekly data reviews led by a principal or designee. And I come back to this. They had an advisory period, and they really worked with their students, their high school students, to make sure that they were coming and showing up. So, yeah, I think.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Sorry.
So at this point, we're going to take questions, and there are two ways in which you can ask questions. Because this is a broadcast event, if you have a question and you're in the room with us, we ask you to go to one of the two microphones. We have one on either side. Just walk up and ask your question so that the Facebook Live audience can hear it. Or if you're on Facebook Live, you can type in your question, and it will be miraculously conveyed to me, and I'll read it aloud, okay? All right, so while people are getting up and getting their questions together, I have a beginning one for all of you. So what what attendance data do you most commonly get asked for from mentors or from principals? What do people really want?
You would be surprised. They simply want to know the percent of kids that are in their buildings.
Who are chronically absent.
No, just the percent of kids that are, like, what's the attendance rate? What's my average daily attendance? So falling back to that kind of older view of attendance. And then they often lead to, well, what's my chronic absence rate?
In addition, they also want discipline and grades.
And they want to know, how can they increase the numbers? How can they, for their ADA purposes, they want to know, how do you get more kids to come and to stay and participate and to engage? And is your process a idea, or is it a proven theory? Can you actually make something happen in this building that will impact culture and climate?
You know, the fascinating thing about the ADA question, and just for those of you who are not from a state where funding is based on average daily attendance, states like California, that number has great meaning to one's revenues and bottom line, which is why that number comes up so often, but it's not in every state.
No, and Colorado is actually a state in which we have a count day, and so funding is based on a week in October.
Right. Yes, Ms. Brenda.
When I was a principal, I wanted something simple, because as a principal, you don't have a lot of time. So I want a report that's going to give me the most information, one piece that I can look at, so that I can then take that and figure out what do I need to do. Because principals they don't have a lot of time to do a lot of looking at everything. Maybe you give that to somebody, but you want one that gives you the bottom line, the big picture, and then also you want help as, now what do I do? I have all this data, now what? So I'm hoping that along with these data pieces, you're saying, okay, if your child is tier 1 in attendance, these are the things you do. Tier 2, tier 3, there's a plethora of things and things that you can pull from. Because it's great having the data, but if you don't know what to do with it, it doesn't do you any good.
So I want to go back to Teresa. When you first started, you told us that story of what it was like when you were a principal and you had your ADA and your truancy. Now you have chronic absence. What's the difference between the three in how it guides your actions?
So that's a great question, and it actually has shown just from conversations how much time you have to spend actually defining what you mean by chronic absence versus truancy versus average daily attendance. Because if people don't understand the differences between those three, then they go off on a track that is not going to get them to where they want to go. So although we produce truancy data, we have converted as a district over to chronic absence, and all of our data reports are referencing chronic absence because that is really what we want to address regardless of the reason, and understanding that truancy is just one type of absence, but it is not the only absence that we should be concerned with. We now really just spend some extra time making sure everyone is clear on what the definitions are and how they should be looking at chronic absenteeism and not just truancy.
Okay, so I don't want to hog the mic. Do y'all have questions? Yes, ma'am. Please speak clearly in the mic. Say who you are, where you're from, and what your question is.
Lauren Haley Zembo in Flint, Michigan, and I guess this question is either for first for Teresa, but if others have ideas. You mentioned that it's important to have an attendance team, and that it's you need another person besides the principal being a lead. So can you talk about maybe some of the other building staff or positions that have helped serve in that role?
Certainly. So one role we've started a couple years ago, we're a community school district. And so we obtained funding for what we call a community school manager. And now 36 of our schools either have funding from a grant or they actually put it in their school budgets to actually have this administrator on campus. And it's new because this is the first non-certificated administrator in a school site in Oakland. So we really had to be really careful on how we define that role. But one of their primary roles is attendance. And they take the lead in the schools where there is a community school manager. Our other schools have either a teacher on special assignment, they may have a social worker or a case manager who can actually serve as the lead. In some cases, the after-school program director, because they work so closely with our schools, may serve as the lead. So there are a variety of positions that serve as the lead, and it's left to the autonomy of the school to determine who that person is. But we really try to support principals not to be that lead.
Yeah.
We have a question in the back.
Hi, I'm Beth Fraster from Mass Mentoring Partnership, and I'm interested in how your schools balanced.
Yeah.
So my question is about balance in a school building and in a school system between the data collection and the energy about understanding the data, using the data as a tool, and the mentoring and the implementation, understanding about how to do the mentoring program, the energy it takes to create the mentoring program, the value placed on the mentoring program, so that the data mentoring kind of balance, if anyone could speak to that.
You want to talk about the data, and then I'll talk about the.
Christina, why don't you start?
Okay, so so in terms of balance, right? So how many of you have ever been a classroom teacher or a teacher in a building and sat at night and compiled attendance behavior with your grades, maybe plan data from another place? Yep. So we intentionally adopted the data system that we have to take that piece of the work away and also to make it standardized, right? Because that's the other thing that we have trouble with at points in an educational system is one teacher will compile this data set, but no other teacher can ever compile and make it match or make a data set similar. So we, to hopefully support the balance really of getting to the meat of the work in working with kids. That's really where the impetus came from to create our data system.
That's
Wes?
that's so interesting that she used that analogy, because when someone takes something from and does it for the district, for instance, right? So we created a mentoring program, Dr. Manuel and I, and it wasn't funded initially. The district didn't really see the need for it. And so when Dr. Manuel went and found the money for our first conference, and the conference was so successful, then we went into our village mentoring program. We had we had 300 students that came to our conference. From that, there was 20 schools represented. So we had 20 principals that we could engage in terms of the village mentoring program. Of that 20 principals, maybe 5 of them stepped up and actually said, we'd like to engage. And one of the things you need to find is, where are your champions? Do you have champion principals within your district, and who will champion your effort? Because when you find the principal champion, then they will provide you the resources and personnel within that building to make it happen. And so it's not a cost in terms of to our department, in terms of actually building the machine. It's just the buy-in necessary. Then you get your adult mentors that come on board, and eventually now you've got a machine that's running, and it's taken about 3 years now, just as Dr. Manuel talked about, in terms of actually 13 villages that we had last year. With our UCLA collaborative, they're bringing another 28 on. So actually we'll have 41 schools before the year's out. But that's where the effort is on the front end, in terms of building the machine and putting it together. And those are some things we can share information with you as well.
Thank you so much. And so we come to the end of our time together on Facebook Live. I want to thank each one of you for your insights, your data, your sharing, all the lessons learned. Thank you, Teresa, Brenda, Wes, and Christina.
Thank you.